Blaine. I'm the president of Liftport Group. We've been doing these Dare Greatly space podcasts for pretty close to 6 months now. I don't know exactly the starting point and ending point, but it's been a while now, and I'm starting to like it. You know, it took me a little while to get the hang of it. It took me a little while to kind of feel comfortable here. It definitely took a while to kind of get our systems in place to be able to produce this. Now, we haven't been every single week, but we are pretty consistent, twice a week, Mondays and Wednesdays. And pointing out that one of our clients, the Red Planet, the Mars Society, the Red Planet Live show, is on Tuesdays. And pointing out another client we've got coming up, which is the Space Frontier Foundation. They are also going to be on Tuesdays. So our schedule is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 5 to 6. So definitely, I hope you join us for that. If you're not aware, you can catch the shows kind of after the fact on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/liftport. We have a Discord channel that is not as active as we'd like it to be, but it's definitely a place to post and communicate with us about the show itself. We've got our live chat, so the folks on LinkedIn, especially LinkedIn, but in other places also, have been pretty active. Big shout out to Leah. She's done a great job in building out the Spotify channel. So let me just post that here in just a moment. I have too many links on my screen. Oh my gosh. All right, there we go. So here are... We've got quite a few posted, north of 20 now, I think, maybe north of 15 for sure. So that is here. Definitely check that out. I think it's kind of funny because, well, I just did an exaggerated and a pause. I'm told by our editing team, Sinky has done a terrific job doing editing for us, that he cuts, if it's an hour-long program, he cuts about 10 minutes worth of ums, ahs, pauses, and me looking for links. So the Spotify channel is definitely really strong. It's a strong way to watch, listen to our show. So definitely enjoy that. Thanks. I really appreciate that. We've been looking some stats, so our stats are good. That's really nice to see. We had University of Puget Sound students come in and take a look at some of the stuff that we were doing. So I'm giving the final report to the professor tomorrow morning. So that'll be interesting. And I think that's kind of all I've got for housekeeping. I think I said last week, our terrific intern Jen has left us. She has gone on to travel the US and then is going back to Seoul. And then, hey, Jonathan, thanks for joining us. And then Rachel's writing some pretty good articles here. She actually did some really cool stuff about 2 weeks ago and getting caught up on an analog site conference. So that was really cool. So today we're going to switch gears. You know that the kind of three formats that we do. Sometimes we have a guest speaker. Sometimes we do a news recap. And sometimes we look at policy documents in some depth. And today it's going to be number 3. We're going to focus on a document that kind of near and dear to my heart. I'll share some of its history Just a moment. So this has been going on for a while now. Air Force Research Lab and New Space New Mexico, which, by the way, is just recently this week branded themselves as New Space Nexus. So it's not focused on New Mexico the way it has been for a long time. But between New Space New Mexico, New Space Nexus, Air Force Research Lab, and Dr. Mosier, the Director of Science, Technology, and Research for the U.S. Space Force, those three, and another one, Defense Innovation Unit. Those four organizations have, for the last several years, been running a space futures workshop. I've been pretty fortunate to have been part of that almost since the beginning. Although, caveat, I was not actually at this event, so that's important to note. So what this does, and its history is in a different document. Let me get there. Its history is in this document. Again, by the same people, Office of the Chief Scientist. This was written in 2019, before there was a Space Force. So at the time, Dr. Mosier's role was Chief Scientist of Air Force Space Command. He has since been promoted to Chief Scientist of U.S. Space Force. Personal note here, I have his challenge coin. Going to bring it out. Give me a second. I have the Chief Scientist challenge coin. It is pretty cool. So that's it right here. So I'm pretty proud of that little piece of metal there. So he's been running these things for a while here, and this is the beginning. It was the Future of Space 2060. I'm going to post the link to the channel here. This document is fascinating. It is definitely worth the read. Keeping in mind, it's almost 5 years old. I was an original participant of this one, and I don't want to call myself an editor because that is a little presumptuous, but I was, let's say I was a reviewer. Yeah, I think that's fair. I was a reviewer of that document. So pretty interesting stuff there. A lot has happened. A lot has changed. That document predates Starship, right? That document predates a lot of stuff. So pretty interesting, worth reading. I'm only showing it as background. That's not the document we're going to be talking about today. So, but it is worthwhile taking a look at this thing as a glimpse into, I'll say, where we were looking forward into the future. So I strongly disagreed with putting a timeline of 2060 on this thing. It was quite irritating to me, and I made that very clear. But that was actually an important element that Dr. Mosier needed kind of political cover to start looking at closer, nearer things. So he had to start from that spot. So hats off to his leadership on that decision. By the way, we are trying to get Dr. Mosier onto our show. It's a little challenging scheduling the Chief Scientist of Space Force. So he has expressed enthusiasm, but now it's trying to figure out how to pin him down for an hour. So pretty excited about that. Okay, so then let's get into our actual document. And as I said, those futures documents have been going on for 5 years here. So this is the newest iteration. There was a meeting convened at the end of last year, but this report only came out about a week ago. Couple things that I think are pretty important from the front page. So let me grab this and share it to the chat. Okay. This is the actual document. I'm going to type it out. Just bear with me here. It's a crazy long name. Commercial planning assumptions for the U.S. Space Force. Okay. I'm sorry for my typos. Okay, so let's talk about what this thing is. Importantly, look, this is a Space Force focused document, right? So you've got to understand that going in, that this is not necessarily a commercial space sector document. This is a Space Force focused document. And so they're going to have priorities and focus that would be different than if you were looking at a NASA document or European Space Agency document. It might be a little more similar if you were looking at CNSA, the Chinese National Space Program, because that program is carefully bound to its military programs. But it would look pretty different if you were doing an array of the commercial space sector. I want to point out, I had nothing to do with the graphics here, but space stations and space elevators as a part of the Space Force future, that is near and dear to my heart. So whomever did the graphics of this, I am very happy with that. I don't really understand some of the other graphics of this, but this one I am pretty happy with. Pointing out, I think you've seen me point to other documents that Peter Gerritsen has contributed to. He's been a part of the Space Futures group for a while. He's a part of he writes a lot of stuff with New Space New Mexico, the Space Industrial Base. But a new name that you might not have seen as often is Lee Steinke. I'm going to take some credit for that. I helped Lee get her job at Cislunar Industries. She actually has 3 jobs. She got 2 of them on her own. She got all of them on her own. Who am I kidding? She's a super talented gal. But I made the introductions that led to her current job, so I'm pretty happy about that. I don't know these other 3 people. I am going to look them up later, but that they put a space elevator in here is kind of mind-boggling to me. So it's a long document. It's 70 pages long. There's a bunch of stuff in it. We're going to spend most of our time here in the executive summary, but I want to point out the end of this, these vignettes, right? These last 4 pages, 3 pages. These things are really interesting. They are so interesting that our show on Wednesday is going to exclusively review them. I'm just going to jump straight to them right now. I'm not going to talk about them, but I want y'all to pay attention to them, think about them, and then we're going to come back on Wednesday. So Jonathan, if you're still around, definitely come back on Wednesday here. All right, so these little vignettes, they're basically small stories that are used to kind of examine a possible future. So I'm not going to take all of these, but I'm gonna kind of go through them pretty quickly. Um, this one I think is interesting. A whaling expedition, an open source university effort in the ASEAN, Association of South Asian Nations, uses multi-phenomenology commercial satellite data to track whales using big data and machine pattern recognition. This capability results in the ability of other actors to monitor the location of submarines with targeting accuracy. U.S. intelligence learns an adversary has plans to attack the U.S. nuclear submarines using this capability. The U.S. must choose to impair the function of a particular class of U.S. and allied commercial civil satellites that supply the data and that may not be susceptible to cyber electronic warfare, requiring an in-space response. So these are scenarios built out of real-world data, and then how does U.S. Space Force respond to that? I like this one too. Vulnerable lines. Heavy lift, low cost, reusable launch has enabled an extensive logistical infrastructure, including space refueling, reprovisioning, assembly, upgrade, and repair. As in aviation, the civil infrastructure is shared nationally and internationally. This servicing infrastructure is critical for ensuring U.S. and global civil capabilities throughout LEO, GEO, and across cislunar space, as well as for commercial transport for space manufacturing and resource extraction, including movement of asteroids. Due to a poorly established regime of territoriality in space, the infrastructure is vulnerable to attack and damage. Adversarial nation states and non-state actors have dual-use, highly mobile logistic spacecraft that can threaten the servicing infrastructure. A hostile power begins to aggressively maneuver to threaten this shared infrastructure. So that's just some of them. There's some really fascinating ones in here. This kicking sand one is probably very near and dear to our heart. And Moon is a harsh mistress, also pretty near and dear to what we're trying to accomplish. We're going to spend some time looking at this kicking sand and Moon is a harsh mistress vignette. And we might look at defectors as well. So these I think there's 7 of them, 9 of them. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, there's about 9. These are problem statements that Space Force has to think about. I'm going to quickly share a piece of news. We'll come back to this in a minute. Congress is considering how to deal with a National Guard for Space Force in the same way there's a National Guard for the Army, Navy, Marine Corps, and even Coast Guard. So what are they going to do, right? Like, who is going to be eligible for the Space National Guard? By the way, I think that would be super fun. I would seriously consider that. And then also, that is the wrong article. 4-star General Salzman, which we're pretty happy that we have had on one of our Conversations for the Future shows. So pretty happy to have hosted General Salzman. He was, quote, only a 3-star general when he was on our show. He has now become a 4-star general and is the commander of Space Force. So he's going out and saying, I don't like our mission statement. It's pretty boring. What can we do to make a better mission for Space Force. So I think that's actually pretty cool. Let me make sure I've got this link in here correctly. Let me check that link and verify that that works, because I'm not sure if I cut it in the right spot. So Space Force is going through this kind of like, who are we? What are we going to do when we grow up kind of situation. And then you put, these little vignettes in front of them and say, these are the problems that the people thinking about the future are thinking about. So I think they might be right to say, what's our Space Force mission? So let me get back to this. So yeah, we're going to go through these vignettes a little bit more detail on Wednesday. I'm going to spend just a little bit of time going through what the report says. I really encourage you to read it yourself. There's a lot in here. I'm not going to be able to cover everything. Like this piece, the Space Futures Workshop with Industry was hosted by New Space New Mexico. We just talked about that. Specifically focused on obtaining industry inputs to quantify as much as possible the state of space in 2032 and beyond to 2045. The sweet spot that I've always been paying attention to is 2035. So they're just a little bit off of where I want to be paying attention to. But it's, they're in the right ballpark, right? This was my argument when I said I didn't want to do the 2060 date with the first Space Futures Workshop. The 2060 date seemed impossibly far away. I am usually one of these 61 industry participants. So it's a pretty small group of folks that make these workshops possible, right? Like, it's small enough you could get something done, your voice is heard, your opinions matter, and they're pretty carefully vetted who gets to go to this thing. So I again reiterate, I did not go to this last one in November. There was no way I was going to. I was not traveling in November last year. So where are we? Things I want to point out. I do not like this graphic, and I do not think it makes a lot of sense. So I have some concerns about the data source here. If you scroll into it, they're saying New Space New Mexico came up with this, but I don't know the data for where they came up with this. So this doesn't feel right, but I don't have any actual knowledge. So I don't want to like pretend that I know things I don't know. But this is the future, right? The space economy is between $3 and $8 trillion. I think that is probably in the right range. We're at $500 billion right now. Most of that is in data and being moved back and forth, whether that's television screens or classified intel, or just scanning the world and taking photographs. Whatever that is, it's about $500 billion currently. And the idea that 10 years from now, it might move from $500 billion to $3 to $8 trillion. I think that's probably in the right general ballpark. But I think it's too soon to tell that. So if it were me writing this report, I would not be emphasizing the space economy as a known or even remotely known piece of knowledge. So but I think they had to. I think I think I've got a lot of respect for uh, Lee and Peter. So I think they started with this because they wanted to show, hey, it's a big number and it matters. And the Space Force budget is, 20 trillion. I think it just got bigger than NASA's budget, but only just a little bit. So 25 billion, something in that range. So 25 billion currently to support a $500 billion economy. That seems in the right general ballpark. I don't know how they get to this 15 billion to 52 billion dollar number. I would love to see the data that supports that. I'm not disagreeing with it, but I'd like to know where the source is, because I think nobody can think that far in advance 2060. To put this all in perspective, this 3 to 8 trillion by 2032, that's about it's about 15 to 30% of the US total economy today. We're at 22, 23 trillion dollars, saying that in 10 years, space is going to be 10% to 30% of the US economy. That seems a bit generous, but that's the global space economy. I don't know if I'm buying those big numbers. So I'm curious. I'm curious about that. The number of space assets and activities have more than doubled. Well, I think that's actually a done no-brainer there. We saw that SpaceX by itself nearly doubled its capacity last year, and it's on track for another 50% this year. So to say that the number of space assets and activities have more than doubled, that's actually on the low side, I think. I think that's really low. And then this, 20 to 200 people are operating in space at any given time. This is an exact question I put forth to both Namrata Goswami and Peter Gerritsen early last year at our space stations topic. We had about 6 space station focused interviews, sessions, and the number of space stations when we were asking that question was all over the map. If I remember right, Gerritsen came in at 800 to 1,000, which probably was on the high side of everybody, but I personally liked it. I'm going to show you a really cheesy website that I think Better Futures can do a way better job at. I was like, how many people are in space right now? And this says 10, and I think it's wrong. We just had a new flight go up, and I don't think it's counting the Axiom people so I don't know if this website is accurate. I think it is not. I think there's 7 people on the space station and 3 people on the Heavenly Palace in China. And I don't think they've been there for more than a year. I think this website is out of date. So I was really disappointed with this. I think we could do better than that. Let me come back to my page. So how many people are going to be in space at any given time? Well, I think there's 14 up there right now. So I think that it's a really safe bet if you consider that there's at least 5 space stations that have multi-$100 million in revenue and multi-$100 million in capitalization. Two of them are funded by bona fide billionaires. I think we're going to have an awful lot of people in space. Are we going to have 200 in space in 10 years? That number seems high, but 20 seems ridiculously low. So I would probably push that number up. Another assumption they're making is the commercial sector dominates space data and space industrial foundations. I think that's absolutely true. The amount of money going into this sector is substantially higher than Space Force and NASA combined. So I think we're going to see an awful lot of commercial stuff happening here in the near future. A lot of stuff has been paid for, and yes, there are going to be companies that fail. Virgin, pretty clear example. And for that matter, Stratolaunch looks like they're buying Virgin for something ridiculously low, maybe $17 million for a company that was valued at billions not that long ago. So yeah, there's going to be some shakeouts. That's the second time that the private equity company that bought Stratolaunch is also making an offer towards Virgin. So even though these are distressed assets, both of these companies failed, and both of them were bought by the same specialized private equity company. Yeah, the commercial sector is going to dominate in space. I feel very confident of that. I think there's definitely going to be competition among space nations. That's growing all the time. Just this week, the United States and Australia committed to a growing partnership between our two space agencies. So that's really cool to see. And I think it's no surprise that the pace of space technology development and employment is going to grow. I don't think that's going to surprise anybody. There are some surprises here that I was really not prepared for. And again, this is a Space Force document, and they are considering that there are regular cyber and directed energy attacks on space systems. Let that sink in for a second. Regular attacks on space systems. I don't know at what point you declare war on something, but if you are getting regular cyber and directed energy attacks on space systems, you got to wonder where that line gets drawn. Have we just gotten to the point where we're accepting that cyber intrusion is a part of the daily norm and that therefore that doesn't constitute an act of war? I'm not sure where that line is. And then the other thing, again, this is a document funded by National Defense, Defense Innovation Unit, Air Force Research Lab, New Space New Mexico, and the Office of the Chief Scientist of U.S. Space Force. And they put in their givens, their statement of givens, that the U.S. is not the undisputed leader in space, but shares leadership in most categories of space activity. So that is a pretty interesting statement all by itself. Like, I think that's like a master's thesis if you just drilled into that. So I was a little surprised that that was one of the core assumptions of this document. Okay, so without going into as much detail as we have so far, they prioritize, what does it say? In such a future, where should the U.S. Space Force focus its attention and efforts? The participants identified the priority order for U.S. Space Force impact and attention as, in order, data, visibility, logistics, industrial foundations, and human presence. So this is the industry participants have said to Space Force, this is where we think you should prioritize. Data is the key to the commercial space kingdom. At the end of the day, you can make only so much money with rockets and only so much money building space infrastructure. And the real money, where people are making all of their real money, is in data. So, and that's been true since almost the very beginning of the space age. So I understand why Space Force is prioritizing that. Hey, Doug, I only just saw your question. Thanks. Dr. Plata from the chat, he's asking, how large do you think the market, oops, I just lost it. Hold on a second. How large do you think the market is for business intelligence such as Planet Lab and at Starlink scale? All right, so let's break that down a little bit for folks that don't know understand that whole question. So Starlink is SpaceX's data arm, right? That's their communications platform. And Planet Labs is, for a while, they held the record of having the largest fleet of privately owned spacecraft. Planet, Leah, if you can grab Planet's link and post it to the chat, I would appreciate that. Planet is a great organization. I'm very impressed by it. I have been since its beginning. I have several ISU friends over there in senior leadership positions. So I'm impressed by both of those organizations. And Planet's mission is to photograph the whole world every day. The whole world every day. They have a crazy amount of data, right? They've been doing this for, I think, 7 years, if I got my timing right. Publicly traded company. I don't know that much about their financials. And they have been photographing the world every 24 hours for several years now. So the amount of data that they already have is crazy. Doug, I don't know if I can answer the question, how large do you think the market is for business intelligence? I think we have barely touched this, the smallest piece of that yet, right? For now, space data and intel from space, they're specialty products. But there are several companies that are trying to figure out how to take all of these disparate data sets and commoditize it into a phone app. So if you add in, and granted there's hype, but if you add in the potential of generative artificial intelligence, I think you start getting layers and layers and layers of data on a particular place in ways that we don't understand yet. I think about the real estate markets, for example, right? If you want to buy a house, if you want to sell a house, if you want to construct a pier on a wharf on the water side somewhere, the amount of data that you could get from satellites right now is completely unavailable. It's hard to get to. It's very expensive. But I think in the pretty near future, you're going to start to normalize getting space data. Now, is that 2 years away? No, probably not. Is it 7? Yeah, for sure. So I think there's a limit. There's a time limit there. But I think we have barely started to scratch the surface of using space data. as general consumers, as just normal people out in the world doing their thing. So yeah, I don't have an answer, but I think that number is going to be a very big number. But I think it's going to take a while till we get there. I hope that answered your question, Doug. All right, so data. I just mentioned a little bit about visibility. Space domain awareness. You can always tell who you are talking to because they either call it space situational awareness, and that's what the civilian says, or space domain awareness, and that's what a military officer says. And given that this was written by now retired Lieutenant Colonel Garretson, I'm going to guess he put the right word in. I also know that Garretson knows General Shaw, Major General Shaw, two-star General Shaw is the guy who really pushed the name change for space domain awareness, and there's a pretty interesting PDF. I don't know if I could find that. Leah, that might be a little bit tricky, but maybe you can find the space domain awareness memo from Major General Shaw, S-H-A-W. I'm not going to get into it right now. So, and then they're talking about, not a 1,500%. This is 1,500 times better reduction in latency from the event happening to when they get the information and can react to it. So visibility is going to be the key to all of space. It's one of the reasons why we want to build an asset out at the Earth-Moon Lagrange point to have what I refer to as total space domain awareness. So that's a proposal we submitted a couple of years ago. Maybe it was too early. I think maybe now it might be just right. So that's something we're going to submit again. So we're going to skip some of this stuff because we're going to go into it more. This logistics element, to me, this is saying that regular point-to-point suborbital is going to happen and regular launch to LEO, and then from LEO go anywhere else you want to go, that is going to happen. So this, I think, you should really definitely spend some time reading this section. There's a lot more detail in the core document here. But this is the stuff why I've referred to Starship Singularity. Garretson also wrote another Starship Singularity paper. This is the stuff that I think changes everything. So it's like, in a way, we're kind of used to data. We've been doing that for a long time. We have a good handle on visibility. We've been doing that for a long time. But this logistics section, that's pretty new. I understand why they put it as the third element, but I would bet very heavy that this grows very quickly. Is it going to outpace visibility and data? Is it going to outpace data? Probably not, but it might outpace visibility. That's my own prediction for a guy who wasn't at the meeting. So I want to keep making that disclaimer. This industrial foundation is key. Mass on orbit. This is straight out of Peter Garretson's playbook. So I recognize the author pretty clearly. But interesting to note, I don't have it up, but Garretson pointed out that it's been 15 years since the Air Force Research Lab published the space-based solar power document. I was also part of that a long time ago also. I think that's the first time I ever encountered Garretson and Colonel Smith, Kylie Smith, and Lieutenant General Steve Quast. So was that document. So he's talking about, let's get power, the magnitude of space generated power for in-space and terrestrial use, and tons of refined basic materials produced per year in space. That's where we're going, right? I want no illusions. Everybody that's watching the show knows that that's where humans are going. We are going to space to get stuff, and it's going to make living on Earth better. So, pretty exciting. This section's really worth reading. And then finally, almost as an afterthought, how many people are going to be up there? The level of human presence will be driven principally by increased reliability and cadence in transport of humans and goods to space, in-space transportation technology, policy-enabled operations, and improved environmental control and life support. Let that sink in for a second, right? This is, the fifth thing that the civilians are saying to Space Force that they should pay attention to. The industrial professionals are saying to Space Force, you should pay attention to this. It's the last thing on the list, but it's pretty darn important. The level of human presence will be driven principally by increased reliability and cadence in transport. We all know what that means. That's Blue getting better, Blue Origin getting better, SpaceX getting better, Rocket Lab getting better, Relativity getting better, Astra, if they can figure out what's going on, getting better, the creation of new spaceport companies like Tom Murata is building. All of those things make the level of human presence grow, right? But also the technology increasing, right? That's the place that Liftport lives. That's the area we want to be good at. Policy, that's why this show exists, right? So people understand that this is where the sausage gets made. And of course, improved environmental controls and life support, right? So, and yes, by the way, I did get confirmed from my awesome team. There are 14 people in space right now. Okay, so with that, I'm going to switch gears for a moment. Not a very interesting room, not a very interesting picture, but a pretty interesting room of people. I know some of them. I'm not going to out them. I don't think that's appropriate. But so they talk about what did we do? How did we do this? Where are we going? I'm going to skip some of that. I'm going to point a few things out, not from this session, but I want to skip to their questions. Hang on just one second. Okay. I thought I had a question, but I don't. Okay. Okay. This workshop attendee pre-event survey. So both Lee Steinke sent this out. I saw it. I sent it to a bunch of our people. So my answers are included in this. But this survey is pretty important. I think it's closed down, but I would love to get this reopened and add more people to it. So let's kind of take a look at this stuff in some depth here. So who are the people, right? What career stage are they in? Some NGOs, a little bit of academics, defense. Curiously, no early career defense people in here, which kind of makes me wonder, the cross section of who saw this. I put myself here. I put myself in later career, small commercial, right? So this is me and a lot of people I know. But it's important to know the cross section of people answering this thing, right? So primarily, it's a lot of late career people, right? And look, it's people going to LinkedIn, using that as a tool. So I'm not really surprised by this. All right. Do we have government contracts? That was a no for us. Is your company headquartered here in the U.S.? Yes. Would you go to space if you could? I flip-flop on that all the time, but my answer tends to be no. I don't know whether I said, I think there was a little bit more ambiguity in the thing, but I tend to say no. I realized a long time ago, it's my mission to build Columbus a ship. I don't necessarily need to sail with him. So, all right. Which of the following factors will be greater in 2032 than today? Competition among nations, no surprise. Defense space investment, no surprise. Commercial space investment, no surprise. There's 69 people that have said, over 50 said the commercial space investment is going to be higher. I don't think that's really a surprise to anyone. And I also don't think that the lowest answers are global economic health. I actually have a little bit more faith that global economic health is going to be better, but I'm in the minority there. I think this is a super confusing chart, and I don't like it very much. I'm just going to leave it on one screen here for a second. How important will each category of space capabilities be to national power? Data is the top, right? Visibility, logistics, industrial foundations, and human presence. This is consistent with what we showed earlier. And I think this is how they got that ranking system. But yeah, this is not how I would show this chart, this information. I don't think it's going to be any surprise that data and visibility are necessary for national power. So we're going to skip all that. Data, there's a lot of stuff in here about data. We're going to talk about that more on Wednesday. I really want to spend time in the charts here. What's the highest priority? Resilient communications, right? That's always going to be true. Space capable electronics, and then the agility of upgrading. The reason I bring this one up is that this is where you get folks like so this is kind of how this process works. The Office of the Chief Scientist writes a position paper. It's called a S&T, Science and Technology paper. That gets promoted up the food chain. General Salzman check boxes it, says, yep, we agree. From that, it moves over to things like AFWorks and SpaceWorks and a couple other organizations that then use this information to create technology roadmaps that say, we want to fund SBIR technology development in resilient communication. We want to fund STTR space, research projects in space capable electronics, right? So that's super important. I did find that when I was doing this survey that the survey itself kind of gave you the answers they were looking for. So I would have made this a little, I like this, but I would have enjoyed it if it had been a little bit wider. No surprise, data transport, access, logistics and sustainment, and spectrum agnostic communications. I think that one's interesting, and I don't entirely understand it. There's a movement to change out of some spectrum allocations for radio frequencies and move into light, visible and invisible light. So I'm not really sure what this one is about. We're going to kind of move on. I'm going to skip these pieces again. We're going to talk about more on Wednesday and then get more into the graphs here. Tech refresh rates of 9 months. What does that mean? That means I've got a satellite in the sky, and let's go back to Planet Labs because they're the ones who actually pioneered this faster than anybody. So Planet Labs, again, 7, 8 years ago, they had just a few hundred satellites, maybe 100, 150 satellites. By far the largest satellite owner in the world at the time. And they would see that their birds would degrade on maybe a 18 to 24, maybe 36-month basis. And it's not that that machine was failing. It wasn't. It's that the rest of the world had better technology, better optics, better compute power, better chips. And so the world was getting better very quickly. And so can we just refresh our fleet of satellites within 9 months? I think that is very possible. I don't think they're doing it quite that quickly at SpaceX's Starlink. I'm sure they're not doing it that quickly at Planet, only because they've got good stuff in the sky. So it's a cost benefit question. Is the upgraded technology substantially worth the cost of launching another bird? I can't speak to AI processing capabilities. That kind of boggles me a little bit. But refresh rates, very high priority, very high priority. And with that, I think I'm going to close out. Again, there's a ton to this report. I want you to take a look at this section at the bottom. Sorry, it's just taking a second to scroll down. The attendees. It's worth looking at the attendees, by the way. There's some pretty interesting folks there. Graphics. So these are some of the detailed questions that they went into. What will be the level of space activity in 2032? Far higher, more than doubled, right? There's some really interesting stuff in these later graphics. So definitely spend some time there. I'm kind of astounded by this. Where will the U.S. rank in space leadership? Undisputed leader, one of the leaders, or a follower? Well, I definitely did not write follower. I'm not sure who that would be. I definitely think they would be in the undisputed leader category. So I'm a little surprised that 69 people put one of the leaders. I would really like to quiz these people on what that meant. So interesting. Anyway, that's all we have time for today. I'm going to go ahead and close this out. Give me a second here. Always want to do a shout out to my team. Thanks a lot, folks. I appreciate that. We've got some cool stuff coming up. I've mentioned Dr. Moser, Chief Scientist of U.S. Space Force. More than likely, that's probably June. I don't think it's going to happen this month. We've got Lieutenant General Quast coming on board. That's going to be really interesting. Moser as the current Chief Scientist of Space Force, Quast as one of the early architects of what is now Space Force. And I don't want you to think that this is all Space Force all the time, right? Like, I just am noticing that the intersections between Space Force and the commercial space sector are really tight, really close. So we pay attention to it. And in the same way that, we spend time looking at figuring out how the sausage gets made, documents like this lead to policy documents that leads to both executive orders from the president and congressional law that leads to money and programs and developing space. So I hope you see the arc. You got to dig into these things. Otherwise, you just don't know where we're going. And I think these documents really help us figure out where we're going. Okay. With that, I want to say thanks a lot, and we'll see you on Wednesday. Wednesday, we're going to go into this. It'll be a little bit more of a banter because our space analyst, Leah, is going to be on the call then, and we're going to go into and kind of dig into some of these pieces a little bit more. All right, cool. See you on Wednesday. Thank you very much, y'all. Bye-bye.